Hello and welcome to the Better Questions podcast, where my co host and I, Sarah Christine, are breaking barriers one conversation, one workshop at a time. And today we're talking about one of the most pervasive barriers all of us have to making any kind of progress, and that barrier is fear. We're getting dark early, aren't we?
Yes, we are, Landon. Hello, everyone. I'm Sara Christine. Fear. Is it false evidence appearing real? Is it an insidious shapeshifter? Is it an annoying side effect to being human? Or is it an emotional power tool that gets a bad rep? Landon,
And
what do you?
yeah, exactly. That's what we're going to get at today because I don't know a lot of those. I don't know the answer exactly to that, but I know
Right.
it's in there lurking in the deep, dark corners of my psyche and my soul. But the one thing we've experienced is uncertainty for the past 2.5, 3 years, and that's when people are facing uncertainty, when they're facing problem solving or charting navigation or growth or change. Fear of losing something you have, protecting something you have, might be the main thing motivating your decision making. And there's no question fear is a real feeling. You know, we've all experienced, we've all felt it. Heck, I experienced it not 45 minutes ago, and I'm sure I'll tell you about here in a second. But it's just important to take into account and address it. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to ask some better questions. We're going to dig deep. We're going to get in there, and we're going to figure out what it, when we encounter fear, and what we do with it when we encounter for good or for bad or for neutral. So yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
Landon. This is the sound of my voice.
Landon, oh my gosh, it is always a pleasure. And so this is where it's going to be good because I like what you're saying. It's like dark night of the soul. Let's get into the shadow world of all of us, but all really in honestly in corporations, right? Like in any organization, in any team, I feel like fear is prevalent, and yet
Hmm.
no one talks about it. Like I feel
Exactly.
like
No.
it's one of those, like I said, it's like really insidious. Like, but it's actually, I think, one of the driving motivators that people make most of their decisions out of, right? And I'm speaking from personal experience because
Hmm.
I feel like you and I, coming from all different kinds of backgrounds, having all different types of been on sides of organizations, client side, partner side, agency side, having your own businesses side, being in relationships, fear is something that I think is just, it's there. And I felt like, one of the biggest challenges is people like it's kind of like ignoring it, bypassing
Hmm.
it, and those kind of things, especially when we get into business situations, like not wanting to share that we have fear, right? Not wanting to
Yeah.
share that there's something going on that, or maybe we don't know what's going on. I mean, there's a lot of obviously shapes of fear, but honestly, Landon, let's talk about a couple because I think for me and my personal experience, when I'm in fear, I always go back to two things that I
Hmm.
think are the core. And that's like you mentioned one of them. It's like the fear of losing what we have or the
Hmm.
fear of not getting what I want.
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, I'm afraid of losing what I have. So I'm going to start making decisions out of that. Or I'm afraid I'm not going to get what I want. So I'm going to start making decisions out of that.
Exactly.
Neither do good.
No, and it's so funny. Like this happens to me all the time where I'm in a situation, not all the time, I'm trying to mitigate it, but there's situations where I'm feeling fear and I'm reacting to fear and I'm not realizing it until like an hour later. And so I'll give you an example of something that happened to me a few days ago, where I reacted to fear and didn't realize it about an hour later, where I was in a meeting with someone I was working with, and it was a meeting I was already kind of nervous about. Um, and someone in the meeting referred to me as an expert. And right there, that just triggered everything in my brain like light. And I didn't realize until I realized just about 3.5 hours afterwards is that I realized that someone had constructed me in their mind this notion that I was an expert in this topic. And I had this immediate reflexive reaction as like, oh, I need to protect that image they have of me as an expert. And so I better make sure that I'm speaking truth right now in everything that I say. And if I don't feel confident in that, I might look stupid. I might look foolish. They might like think I'm not an expert. And I immediately spiraled into that zone of like, oh, I got to protect this false thing that someone else
Yes.
made for me. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're speaking my language. I mean, like, I was like, oh
Yeah.
God, that just happened to me like 3 times last week. I feel like there's
Right.
also that like fear of like, I'm an imposter. I don't know. But then I'm supposed to know. And so then I'm just like, oh my God, I'm going to start wheeling in that direction. But Landon, you're bringing up a
Hmm.
great point, because I feel like you're not alone. Like, I know if the two of us probably feel this, there's probably a lot of other people out there that have had that
Yeah,
exact same experience. And then you're just like sweating, and then it's like, oh my God, this already looks bad. And I feel like
exactly.
that's the thing where like it's happening to you and the experience that's happening is real, but that's not necessarily the experience that everyone else is having around you. And I think, when there's in that moment, like I can't shift out of that perspective really quick. Like it's really hard, right? I mean, in that moment, I remember you and I talked about this last week, because you were like,
Mm.
oh my gosh, like this is happening. And like now I'm starting to act from it. And, it's like reeling it back, but being onto
Hmm.
yourself, Landon, like you are, I think that's something that is a superpower, because you can be like,
Yeah,
okay, this is happening, but now I can take like where do I need to go with this? Is this really real?
exactly. And that this is where it helps to have, friends, outside counsel, inside counsel, people you can reach out to validate what you're feeling. Because you're absolutely correct. When you're feeling fear, it's a real thing that's happening. It's a stimulus that you need to acknowledge. I
Yeah.
apologize. Someone's knocking at my door right now.
This
Um,
is perfect though, because I feel
yeah.
like this is like we're talking about the fears of like, hey, we're like, go for it, Landon, because we're like gonna we're doing this
Sorry,
like
one sec.
better questions, no problem.
Okay. Yeah. So,
I was
I
like,
apologize. Yeah.
okay, first of all, like even if we like if this goes in, this is awesome,
Mm.
because there's like literally remote working, like biggest fears, right? Like something comes in, somebody
Yeah.
walks behind. Just saw your lovely daughter walk behind you. So I was like, this is awesome, because I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, last time I was on like a conference call, like we were just a conference call. Oh my God, we're on video, but like the cats were going wild and I just got new kittens, you guys. And so
Yeah.
let me tell you about like sweating the fear of like being judged, or like having to be distracted, and then people thinking that I'm not present, and like, but I am present, and then I'm like, oh my God, it's insane. But there are so many dynamics that can go down
Exactly.
that, oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah. The important thing is, to your point, is just be attuned to that feeling and trust it and honor it in that moment. And if you feel like you need to validate what you're feeling, that's important, having your own little board of directors. Um, and that's
Yeah.
something I've relied on, throughout my entire career. And if I don't know if this is an appropriate time, like to ask you this question, like, have you always been able to acknowledge fear, like throughout your career, like early stages? Is it a muscle you've had to like develop over time? And like, to kind of side question is, how has the way you've reacted to those feelings shifted kind of as you've progressed in your career and gone into different roles and positions?
Those are great questions, Landon. You're like, boom, like drop
Yeah.
it. So for
Yeah.
me, because I'm gonna have you spinning this right back at you. But
Yeah.
for me, all laughing aside, like fear has been something that has shape shifted and altered my path, right, for my personal growth, but also for business, because I feel like it's been my biggest ally when I admit that I have it, whether that's privately, whether that's to a confidant like yourself. It doesn't always have to be to the client. You don't always have to do it to your director, your boss, your executive. But
Yeah.
I think the turning point for me is that I acted out of fear a lot, and I pretended that it was real, because I thought people were expecting, they had expectations of me, which they probably did, because of, as all of us are in roles and we have things that we've got to get done, and we have, we're like, even in the nonprofit sector, like I feel like everyone's like funding, like for for-profit companies, like it's about making money, and we've got to be able to hit our bottom lines, and there's a lot of pressure that comes with teams and with the dynamic. And for me, I like what you were saying earlier, because I always thought it was an inside job. So I was suffering silently and like quietly, and I wasn't sharing, because inside, what I found, Landon, was I'm inside an organization. I've been like you on agency as well as like client side owning the brand. Those felt like I felt unsafe a lot, because even when I was like, hey, I'm having fear around us making this certain decision or going in this certain direction, I didn't feel confident at that time, especially in my past, many, many moments, to speak up, because everyone else seemed to be on the same page. But maybe nobody else was speaking up either. And we were all just nodding our heads. I know you've probably been in the room where everybody's like, I mean, you and I feel like when we connect a lot, like for me, like I had to make that turning point that I'm lying. Like that's like part of people pleasing for me, is like, it's also like, I'm lying, and I'm like not sharing. But at the same time, where do I go that's safe? And so, like you said, I had to start with outside confidants. And I went to people that were also in business, right? Also in teams. It wasn't like just going to my partner or just going to my family and friends. This is something where I was like, I really need to express this. And can we, come up with maybe some activations or solutions that I could take back? Like I always say, like sometimes it's better to take my problems to that safe container and bring the solution back, right? Because like I find, and especially you and I in the last few years, the type of work we've been doing, when we get into an interview and it's very intimate and it's very private, people open up and they're telling things. And then you get the leader and the leader's like, why don't they tell me that? And I was like, because it's too close. They are afraid
Yeah.
now you're never going to forget that, and we're outside. And I felt
It,
like that can be detached, right?
Completely. Yeah. You're absolutely right. And you said something earlier about how, fear oftentimes when something doesn't make sense is the thing keeping everyone else in the room from speaking up and saying, this doesn't make sense. That was one of the things it was very early in my career. This taught me kind of to trust my intuition and trust my inner voice. Because a lot of times when you're feeling fear, you kind of artificially inflate the stakes of, if I
Well
say
said.
something that's wrong, everyone's going to know I'm a fraud. Everyone's going to know I'm an idiot. I remember once I was in a really big planning meeting and there was a lot of really important people in there and they were nodding their heads and I was having a really hard time tracking. And so what I tried to, I mustered every bit of courage I had in my body. And I said, I'm really sorry. I tried to summarize my understanding of the situation. And I said, I'm having a hard time connecting these dots. And I could see everyone in the room just palpably exhale like, oh my goodness, like that doesn't make sense to me either. But I realized in that minute, all it took was just, even though I was a junior person, the fact that I was able to point to the thing I didn't understand, and everyone else in the room was able to say, yeah, me too, me too, me too. Everyone kind of glommed
Yeah.
on. Now, that's not to say it happens every single time. Sometimes I'll raise a question like that and say, this doesn't make sense. And it turns out that I just missed something. But
Just,
again, the
yeah.
stakes couldn't be lower because the upside is everyone senses this feeling of I don't understand this either. But the downside is I they correct me. Everyone forgets a minute later because no one cares about me, and we all move on.
Exactly. But see, you're bringing up golden nuggets, Landon, because I think we all think the world, like whether we like it or not, and we're not like, is it whether you're egoless or ego, like we all think the world is revolving around us, right? Because that's where that fear is for me. It was like everybody's gonna judge me, everybody's like like I'm not enough, I'm never gonna be enough, I'm not doing enough. It's like that whole it's attached to a lot of other right little things like perfectionism or feeling like you got to be right or you're not going to get another chance and all of that. Like I love what you're saying too, because it's a real heartfelt place to be able to say courage to speak up.
Hmm.
And that's what you're talking
Yeah.
about is like on that journey of like today, authentically being myself means that if I'm feeling something and I feel like it's almost sometimes with the fear, the moments that I've been working on is that, like you said, there's a burning desire that comes up. And it's almost like a burning desire is literally flames under myself that are like,
Yeah.
Sara, you have to talk right now. And it takes a lot of courage, like you said, to be bold to say, no one else to say this. I'm just going to say, this is how I'm feeling. And it's not, that's also great, Landon, because you're talking about using I statements, not you
Hmm.
statements, and not
Yeah.
assuming, right? We're not assuming that everyone's on the same page, but we're not also assuming that no one's on my page. You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think that's really powerful. And I think that's also really great tactics and tools for people to practice because I think right now what we've been hearing most is people really want to feel safe and be vulnerable with their confidants. That's colleagues, that's teams, that's businesses, and leadership wants that, right? Like everybody wants to feel connected. And I think if we all can agree that, like, even if we have questions, like being in fear is a human condition as well. And so that can be seen as a positive or can be seen as a negative all the time. And I think what I'm hearing from you is like the positive shift is to just
Hmm.
be truthful and speak like, hey, this is what I'm feeling, and also be able to call yourself out. Like, I could totally be in fear right now and I could totally be wrong, and that's okay.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think
Exactly.
that takes a lot of, I don't know, it's very bold. And I also feel like once you do that, like that's been my experience. And Landon, when I'm hearing you, the results are actually very surprising because I find that
Exactly.
like people are much more open and they're like, oh, I'm feeling that too. Or I agree, or I've had some agreement there, or I can hear your part. Thank you for sharing. I don't
Yeah.
get negative results in those moments. I mean, that's been a real true
Yeah.
user test of one.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much to gain and so little to lose by expressing how you're feeling in any moment like that.
Yeah.
Um, you have nothing but upside. It just and to go back to your point about acting out of fear and acting out of ego. This was something that a mentor, and so actually two things. So it's similar to two things I was thinking about. One is I read this study years ago. I swear I'm not making this up, about how cursing in the workplace is actually good for team building,
Oh my God, I read the
because
same one.
yeah,
That's amazing.
it's great because
Oh,
if
it's
you're in an
great.
environment if you're in an environment where you let your guard down and let a few four-letter words slip, it means like
Yes.
I'm being myself around you. This is the way I talk. I'm using slang occasionally, and we're all friends here. I feel like it's the same thing with expressing how you're feeling. It's I'm a human being. I get confused. I got messed up. I have things that I'm worried about. And if you have a team member or a culture that encourages that, it's just so much stronger as a result because you can get to the heart of the issue so much faster. There's none of these weird archaic dances around like let's talk about what we're thinking and feeling without actually putting a label on it. Like let's just get to the heart of the issue. It's so much more efficient.
Exactly. Oh my God,
Yeah.
that's brilliant, by the way. Because I feel like there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of controversy in fear, right? Like you're talking about. And then there's like,
Mm.
it is actually being able to see different sides of things. And I think that's something, Landon, I love what you're bringing up is like, even with cursing, it's like, actually, there's a huge benefit. I mean, that research study was mind blowing because
Yeah.
it actually can help people connect more. And I think what I'm hearing you talk about too, which I think is really powerful, Landon, is like we all want to be seen and heard. We all want to be connected with our
Mhm.
team, especially. And internally, sometimes that is really hard to do because I feel like there's just like fear bombs everywhere. And everyone has different fears. Like, no one, for me, like, a lot of some of the affirmations or tools that they're not even affirmations, they're just thoughts. And I'm like, Sarah, you have no idea what that other person is experiencing. And
Mhm.
I is like not like they could be actually feeling something similar. And so I'm going to take a shot in the dark and I'm just going to speak up, and talk about how I'm feeling. And I think feelings and emotions, that's also part of this, Landon, like start to come in to the situation. Right. And so I feel like
Yeah.
if there's something to like take away from here, because I know we're coming up on time but at the same time, like, it's been a juicy conversation, Landon. I know this is a topic that we will and can continue to talk about for hours
Yeah.
because there's so many nuggets, so many golden nuggets of ways that people can start to shift even just today or in the moment. Like you were saying, like,
Yeah.
is there an opportunity for you to just be the person that is got, then either is the burning desire or maybe it's just a thought and you could maybe practice experimenting, speaking up or sharing with a side conversation with someone in your team like, hey, I'm having
Completely.
this, right?
Yeah.
How are you feeling about it? and
Yeah.
and I think that really opens people up.
Yeah. And on that same token, I wanted to just address one more thing before we wrap this up. I think this is important. One of the things I think that's at least prevented me from speaking up in certain instances, and I know it's probably the case for a lot of people, is a fear of rejection, a fear of like if I express what I'm
Awesome.
really thinking or feeling, people are going to reject me for who I am at core as a human being. So there's a psychologist that I like to follow, Guy Winch. He says that the feelings people feel when they're rejected, it's almost like a physical pain. And even if it's an organization or a person you don't
Wow.
necessarily like, being rejected by them hurts in the same way regardless. Being rejection it elicits an actual physical response that people don't like. And so this is something that's helped me navigate that fear is that, if I speak up and if people respond positively to me, that's great. The payoff there is tremendous. And if I do speak up and express myself and say, this is what I need, this is who I am, and I am rejected, yeah, it's going to hurt, but it gets me closer to that answer of finding my people, finding my tribe, finding the places that value my experience and my perspective all the faster. So that's the route that maybe hurts a little bit more, but it also probably gets you closer to what you want and what's going to satisfy you a bit more. So all
you
the more
know
reason to just take that leap.
Yeah, well said, Landon. Because I feel like this is really, as far as like experience with it, like it's just encouragement, right? I mean, I feel like I got encouragement from people like you when I was, it's like we would talk about this stuff. This was years ago, but like I got encouragement to just take that action and say like, you know what, just try it. Like it's okay. Like I'm here for you. Like, and if Landon, if you were like, I believe in you because you do, and you were like, hey, I'm here, then I had that kind of extra boost that I'm not alone. And even though, look, I've fallen flat in many rooms and it's like, oh my God, it's terrifying. And like you
Yes.
said, it has literally felt like pain. Like there's no suffering
Hmm.
in that. It is pure pain. I never want to experience that again. And the first thing I
Hmm.
want to do is run and hide. I'm the, worthless human being. Like lots of negative thoughts come in. Like, I can't believe I did that. I'm so humiliated. I'm like, like shame, my little acronym for that came out is like, should have already mastered it. Sarah, like you suck, and yet at
Hmm.
the same time, when I would circle back and you and I would talk, you're reminding me that that's part of me, right? That's part of life. That's part of it's happening. It doesn't make me worthless. And that doesn't mean that something didn't happen in that room, right? Because like what it did is that I spoke up, right? And that's something that's really important because I feel like when we don't speak up, and I think I hear a lot of that, and you and I hear a lot of that in the work we do,
Hmm.
that's where assumptions start getting made. And that's the insidiousness of fear that can start to say, well, I assume that that person knows what I'm thinking. I assume that person's having the same experience that I'm having. And it becomes real when it's not. And now I'm playing action out of that. And then the dynamic, and people, and this is where culturally it gets
Hmm.
really negative. And people don't want to work around each other because they feel like there's fear, there's hidden agendas, and there's persons like paranoid because, yeah, duh, like we're feeling our own fear bubble,
Exactly.
right? And then like you're picking up on everyone else's, and it's just like, who wants to work in that kind of environment? Landon, like
Exactly. Yeah.
I feel for that, and we've been there, and it's been really tough.
Yeah. And this is why I really like working with you, especially on projects like this, because it's for us, it's so important to help people navigate around these problems. I feel like the questions we're asking and the experiences we're creating are just custom built to create this experience of trust and understanding and this feeling that no matter what we're facing, there's going to be a way we can get there. It might
Yeah.
look overwhelming and we might be super scared right now, but these problems are not so big and scary. Like all it takes for us is to open the windows a little bit, let in some fresh air, get some conversation going, put some sunlight on it, and we'll start to see some cracks in this tricky problem. And before you know it, we're already halfway there. But really, it all starts with creating a feeling of like, all right, the worst thing that could possibly happen is maybe I'll feel a little silly for a minute. But you know what? That happens to all of us, and I'll be the first
Yeah.
person to be like, yeah, I'm silly. This is fine. Like, let's get to
Totally.
work and solve this problem. Yeah.
I know. And I love it. It's also giving permission, Landon. Like, this is what I love about you too. Is like, look, giving permission to be weird and silly and authentic because we are also beautiful and confident and, graceful and all those moments. But sometimes, all of those different kinds of moments make us who we are, and it's really unique. And I think that's also exploring. I feel like, especially when it comes in teams, especially when it comes in that, like, knowing that each person is a unique individual and that you are enough just being in the room. And I think
Exactly.
that's something that it took a long time for me to learn, that I'm enough for being in the room. I have some expertise, I have some experiences, and trusting that in the right moment that those will pay off for the greater good of the team or for the product or for the service or for the company. And I think that's trusting that. But I feel like when you're talking about like even where to start today, it's remembering and maybe thinking about maybe even just the next time we like feel those twinge of fear, that,
Hmm.
because fear can be that double-edged sword for me, and it rides with like actually where courage is. Like I have to, it's like showing me like, Sarah, like maybe this is where you have your courage, and maybe this is where you have your moment, like you did,
Hmm.
Landon, in many rooms, and so have I, like to speak up, right? And just like, hey, I'm just going to throw this out there, and it can be messy. And I think that's the hard part, is like I'm really hard on myself, and then I think it's got to be perfect, right? But
Yes.
just like going back to that perspective shift a little bit of some of the things we talked about, not maybe saying we have the answers, right? Because that's not what we're talking about with better questions. It's actually like
Hmm.
asking ourselves in this case, because I think if one person starts, like I've seen that change with you, Landon, I've seen that change with myself, like when it's just one person, then another person gets permission, another person gets permission, and then all of a sudden the dynamic has changed, even in like the worst scenarios, cultures that people hate each other because it's so desperate for life, like you said, a breath of fresh air. And remembering, like, is it like asking yourself, like, am I afraid of losing what I have right
Hmm.
now, and that's why I'm not speaking up? Or is it the fear of not getting what I want, and that's why I'm being too demanding, or I'm being, like I'm really repressing my emotions, or I'm really not allowing other people to be creative? Like, where does the original source of fear come from for you? And
Yeah.
then go from there. What do you think,
Hmm.
Landon?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So, two thoughts. So, um,
Perfect.
A client and a mentor of mine a long time ago. This is back when I was in my, I think, late 20s, early 30s, and I was a bit more headstrong and brash back then. I had much less problems speaking up for myself then, probably than I do now. Probably I had the opposite problem where I would just cork off and say whatever. Um, and so anyways, he was telling me, we were at a dinner one night, and he said, Landon, when one of my bosses once told me, when if I'm in a heated discussion or disagreement with somebody else, just ask myself, what if they're right? And just really think that through and think through all the implications. Like, am I going to make less money if they're right? Am I going to be less respected if they're right? And what it all boils down to is, if this other person is right, I'm fearing loss of like self. Like, I'm less of a person if I'm wrong and they're right. When really, like, I lose nothing if they're right. Like, if I'm able to look at things from all sides and this person's right, I live to fight another day. Like, I'm still intact as a human being. like, you know, and this is the other thing that kind of in tandem to that is, when I'm mentoring junior people, I try to remind them, like, you're not a force to be acted upon. Like, you are the sum total of your life experience, and that's the value you bring to
Yeah.
yourself and others. When you're in a room, everything that's happening to you is going through this filter of your life experience. And no one can interpret the things that are happening in a room quite like you can, or quite like the person sitting next to you can.
Yeah.
And so that's the value you bring. And so it does take time to listen to that voice and realize how your experience is informing how you react. But the more you do it and the more you can learn to trust it, the more you can start, really having fun with it and not having to worry so much. And like I said, like,
Yeah.
this is something I'm still working on. Like, I still have moments where I'm getting, like, 2 days ago, where it's like, oh no, I'm an expert. I better not get this wrong.
I
but
think
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Because it's like it's happening to us, right? Like, and we have experience with it, breaking through it, right? And like
hmm,
overcoming the fear. And I think that's something, like, you're spot on, Landon, and well said. And I feel like, we, as everyone's listening to this, like, you hear a lot of lightheartedness and laughter. Like, we've been through it. And for me, like I always say with Landon, I was like, laughing is healing. And when you get to that, but if you're not laughing, like, in all seriousness, like, when that fear moment is happening, that is, like you said, that is real, that is painful, that is,
hmm,
it's almost like it's paralyzing. And I think at
hmm,
that moment, little by little, being able to experiment with yourself again, this transcends out into others in your group, and how things, I don't understand how it works, but it totally works. I've seen
yeah,
it. That you're saying, like, okay, let me just look at myself and ask those better questions to myself, even if it's after the moment, or even if it's like, we've gotten to the point where we can be in it, right? But that's like the gift of, like, the pause will get greater, where you're like, oh, I'll have like the moment to just say, like, I'm on to my tricks, and I think you're also right. Like, this is not my gig. Like, fear is not going away for me. Like, is fear an
no,
insidious shapeshifter? I would say absolutely yes, because when I overcome one fear, like, I was terrified of speaking, and now I'm like facilitating and moderating, and I love speaking. Do you think I have no other fear? No way. I have like massive amount of, it's like, oh, the fear's like, oh, well, she's good with that. Like, we're going to move into these other avenues, and it's like, thanks, life. And sometimes I wake up and it's like right in my face, and I'm
hmm,
overwhelmed, but I will know that after those moments when I don't act, in those moments through courage, and maybe I act through fear, that's when I also, that self forgiveness is really critical, Landing. And I feel like when we're wrapping up with that, like the self forgiveness part, because I get to get another chance. And that's that perfectionist side of me that's going to shame myself and torture myself inside my own mind. Because, before all of this transformation with fear and becoming an advocate with fear, because I'm like, thanks, fear, when you show up now. Before, it was like, engaging with that was like going behind enemy lines for me. Like, it was terrifying. And so I feel like now I'm liberated from that. And but that takes time. And so it's kind of like, it's what you were saying, is like, really just start with, can I find a little humor in, like, fear is a human existence,
exactly,
annoying
yeah,
side effect. And so
completely. Yeah. It's like that old Zen proverb, what did you do before enlightenment? I chopped wood and I carried water. What did you do after enlightenment? I chopped wood and I carried water. Like, this
well said.
process of coping with these stimulus, it's
Yeah.
it's a process that you repeat and you do it again and again. And to your point, like those little loops between, failing and trying again, they might get a little bit shorter, but it's always going to happen. Everyone's going to stumble and trip. But you gotta keep doing it again and again, just to
Yeah.
get better at it, and yeah, just flex that muscle a little bit.
Exactly. Exactly. And I feel like a lot of what Landon, you and I have talked about with, even with better questions and stuff is like, we're not therapists,
Mhm,
but we're acknowledging that human factor, right? And I feel like some of the things like we're going to be talking about can be very, linear. Like I have this and I have that. But a lot of the secret sauce, a lot of the superpowers that every team possesses that can actually transform their problems into these radically awesome solutions and activations that we've seen comes from the invisible. And I think that's where I feel like you're like,
mhm,
hey, like we're acknowledging that this is real. Is fear? We started with the acronym. I use it all the time. False evidence appearing real. Like, even just the nervousness of jumping on and doing something like this, or we just had we're having a presentation tomorrow and we're working with a team, this morning, and it's like, the fear that they're not going to like me because I'm going to give constructive feedback. These things exist all the time. It's just how we respond to them is different. And that's where I feel like as those things evolve and as people work on the kind of invisible, the ones that are really difficult to kind of look at, and you get that outside help or you get that outside to like help your inside, I feel like that's where your superpowers lie in really
mhm.
transforming change wherever you are. I mean, Landon,
Ex-
wrap it up because I feel like we're like I was like, yeah, like we're on it, but it's a process.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this is my last final thought before we wrap this thing up is, what really helps me, and I think it can help a lot of people, especially if you're navigating change in your organization, is really have an honest look at what the stakes are. Like, what really do I have to lose by addressing this problem? Like, for me, in a lot of instances, I'd say like 80% of the time when I'm encountering fear, the main roadblock is my own ego of saying like, I'm going to look foolish, I'm going to look silly. And once I get past that, things get a lot easier. But there's a lot of other stakes involved as well. I'm not going to minimalize the fear because when you're especially when you attack an organizational problem, livelihoods might be at stake. Careers might be at
Absolutely.
stake. Different work streams, projects, initiatives. Those are very real stakes. And so, as long as you're able to separate like the actual stakes of maybe we could improve someone's life significantly, we can improve our business significantly. Once you can look at those things, it puts a lot of the things in context. And some of those other things can go by the wayside. I might look silly. I might make a mistake. Those are silly. The stakes couldn't be lower there. So that's the main
Exactly.
thing to take a look at is just really taking a look at what matters in those moments.
Well said, Landon, because you really got to the heart of it is like really prioritizing, right? Because as we say, like you and I will say, like, is that real? Is that a real, because fear is tied, like the fear of losing what I have or not getting what I want, it is real, right? That's like income, that's family, that's food, that's health, that's also getting that promotion. That's also, moving the needle on products and services, driving that business. It's real, like you said, and it's very, very much, but prioritizing, is it exacerbating? Am I acting out of that instead of saying I acknowledge that yeah, I've got fear here, or of course, like these are significant stakes. And then it's like getting back to the heart of it. Okay, can I then detach from that and get into some courage, get into some boldness, or just get into some authenticity of like reality and go to your team, go to yourself like we do, and or get somebody else to help outside to say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. Am I seeing this from the right perspective? Am I seeing this from the right lens? Because I think that's also where it's not rose colored glasses when I'm in my fear, like I've got my fear goggles on. Like that
Yeah,
is like, I'm seeing it from a warped perspective because I'm terrified of something else not happening, or I'm terrified of losing something that we need, and that can come in
yeah.
many, many shapes and forms.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's so insidious because even if having that fear leads you to hold on to that same system or same process that's causing you so much pain and so much heartache, like, is it really worth it? Like, you have so much, you might have a lot to lose, but the things you're losing might be things that are bringing you down to begin with in the first place. So
Exactly.
there's so much
Exactly.
upside to just kind of
Yeah.
diving in and looking at it with eyes wide open.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know. And thanks, Landon, because I feel like we're just starting. I know you guys like we're just starting to talk about this, but this is something that obviously is it's in everything, right? It can be very much tied to a lot of things, and it's taken very seriously, and it can feel very real. But in a moment, like you were saying, Landon, is like, we gotta give it a shot, right? Like, I think that's
Mhm.
also the permission, is like giving yourself a shot to take a bold move that could just be talking to somebody in your team, like privately, saying, hey, I'm having these feelings. But like, it's also just getting that safe perspective, that you feel safe. But I don't know, Landon, it's complicated because it's fear, and like fear is not an easy thing. And like you said, we're not here, to answer all these questions, but to here to discuss them. And I think maybe some of those better questions out there today are challenging myself and ourselves on, is it real? Like, am I acting out of fear here? And have I been? And can we allow that to be okay? And
Yeah.
then move forward in a different direction, and like look at the other options of like how we can look at the situation, because we're not alone. I mean, we're not alone. I always tell everybody, and anybody, like clients, think, I'm like, there's 7.9 billion people. Like, pick up the phone. Like, if it's not in your team, it's not in your executive team, it's not in your direct contacts, like pick up the phone, call me. Like, that, like, we can talk about it. You're not alone. And definitely the worst thing that I've seen is when I hide it, and when
Hmm.
I don't address it. And so bringing that out, in any way that feels good to that person, is really powerful. And I think that that's where the magic is.
Exactly, and I completely agree. And this is an open invitation. So I know a lot of folks have, asked for us to start talking about these kind of topics, recording them, making podcasts like this. If there are better questions about fear in your organization that you're facing that you want to bring up, tell us about it. We'd love to hear it.
Right.
And if there's different topics you'd like us to tackle through questions and better questions, you can let us know that too, because we'd love to hear about it. These are the conversations that I think are worth having. We spend most of our day working, and we spend most of our day navigating big, weighty problems like this. And so I feel like the more people are having conversations like this, the better time we're going to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like game on. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And
Let's-
I'm spot on. Like, thank you, Landon. And thank you everyone for out there for encouraging, because I do feel like it's like just seconding Landon. Like, these are really powerful topics, and we're really excited that you guys are excited about us talking about them, and also just starting the conversation and asking the questions, and the better
Mhm.
questions. Thanks, Landon. Oh my gosh, so
Absolutely.
grateful.
Oh, me too. I've had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do this again.
Yes.
Yeah.
See you
All
next
right.
time. All
See you
right.
next
Peace
time.
out.